You're listening to Pastured Poultry Talk, a show about profiting from chickens on grass. You can learn about sneezing hens and roosters named Charlie on other shows. On this podcast, I bring you the business of pastured poultry by sharing the stories of the farmers, the entrepreneurs, and the friends of the movement. This is episode 66, and I'm your host, Mike Badger. This episode is sponsored by my good friends at the Futrell Company. Don't forget to ask your feed manufacturer if they're using Poultry NutriBalancer as the healthy foundation to your chicken feed. And if they're not, you better find out why. In an episode of The Fighting Farmer, my good friend Spence mentioned that one of his processing customers is a bookkeeper and a tax preparer. And that got me thinking about a lot of things, mostly tax time. But then Chad Ward popped up and answered a tax question in the Facebook group. So I caught up with Chad, who is a pastured poultry farmer from Oklahoma and who also happens to prepare taxes and keep books at an H&R Block office. Chad shares several things that can help you prepare for next year's taxes by keeping account of what you're doing. It seems like the beginning of the year is often a good time and place to think about keeping better books, keeping better tabs on what you're doing. So that's our conversation here today with Chad. It's not going to be a bookkeeping call. He's not going to tell you how to be the best accountant ever. He's going to give you just a couple things to make your life easier and account for stuff that you're doing all year long. So we're going to talk about how to track your mileage a little bit more efficiently. He's going to recommend some user-friendly accounting software that is not QuickBooks. One of the things that most intrigued me about Chad was a discussion on 1099s. This was actually the point that Spence brought up on his podcast. So we dive into the 1099 issue a little bit. But before we get to Chad, let's take a quick look at some poultry news and views and headlines. I subscribe to a lot of different news sources, and one of those news sources is Poultry World. I get these emails delivered to my inbox, and one of the things that recently caught my eye was an article on antibiotic use and here's the quote that caught my eye. Antibiotic use in U.S. poultry production is 3 times higher than the U.K. and 5 times higher for turkeys, according to a report released by the Alliance to Save Our Antibiotics. From that same article, another point of interest draws on a report from the Organization of Animal Health, which is the OIE, which estimates that globally 73% of all the antibiotics that are in use are used in farm animals. The forecast is if farming becomes more intensive, antibiotics will rise by another 53%. Now, you take that estimate for whatever it's worth, just an estimate at this point. But the reality is the use of antibiotics in chicken is a really, really hot topic. There's a couple important marketable points that I think we should pull out here. One is if you're using pastured poultry production methods, you're mitigating the need for antibiotics. And this has to be a key message. Why do we get away with not using antibiotics? Because of our pasture. We got to equate those two things. Interestingly enough, if you're marketing turkeys, this article suggests the antibiotic use is much heavier than in chickens. Nobody's really talking much about the antibiotic use in turkeys. It's all chicken-based, but this article gives us some inclination that we should probably be talking about turkeys and beating that drum a little bit louder. So speaking of turkeys, I'll be presenting a webinar on turkey production with the Food Animal Concerns Trust on March 6, 2018. It's a free webinar to attend, and I'm going to share some key differences in keeping turkeys versus chickens. If you're interested in that, see the show notes at pasturedpoultrytalk.com/66 for registration information. It's free. It's coming up. There'll be an archive of that webinar when it's done. So if you're listening to this after the fact, you can still follow those links and have a listen. And finally, I'm publishing a resource guide with APA. So if you're a producer who sells hatching eggs or chicks, or someone who has developed a product that's of interest and use to other producers that you're trying to market and sell, you're a perfect candidate for this resource guide. It is ad-based, so there is a fee to be included. You can find out more information at appa.org/guide and get in touch with me. Time is ticking down quickly on that, so when you hear this, don't waste time. Now let's go ahead and get into our conversation with Chad.
I'm Chad Ward with Ward Family Farms. We're in Pawnee, Oklahoma, northeastern Oklahoma, about an hour from Tulsa. The farm is my main job for about the last year. This year we'll do around 4,300 broiler chickens, have 250 hens, and then we'll have about 10 acres in vegetables. So it's enough to keep you busy. I do taxes and bookkeeping through H&R Block. It's one of our local offices. And that I come by both of them, honestly. My dad's a farmer. My mom's an accountant. We joke there's 3 of us kids, and my brother is a carbon copy of my dad, and my sister is a carbon copy of my mom doing the accounting, and then I'm kind of the hybrid. My background, I have an economics master's degree, so that's kind of what got me into the accounting side of things. And I got it specifically to do farm and business stuff. It was kind of scratching my own itch and figuring out how to run my business that led me into the accounting thing as I started to figure out all the little tips and tricks and ways to make things run smoothly. It was like, well, I can start doing this for other people too. Yeah. Taxes are really busy at a time when the farm is slow. So
then when you're at H&R Block, I'm guessing you're not just focusing on farm like Schedule F, you're doing pretty much everybody's that walks in the door, or do you specialize in farm?
We all, like, when it's super busy, we all catch anybody that walks in a little bit. But my primary focus is businesses, primarily farms. In our area, there are very few completely professional farmers left. Most people, if you're doing a farm return, they've also got income and things coming from other places too.
We'll save that sad commentary about our life for another day. Spence, on his episode of The Fighting Farmer, talked about you, because you're processing with Spence. You're actually at the APA Professional Pasture Poultry Producers Conference. So, and it is tax time as we record this, people are either thinking about putting it off or they're thinking about getting it done. So I just want to talk around those issues and not necessarily, give specific tax advice here, but what can we as farmers do throughout the year to account for our work, our expenses, our income, and make this time of year easier?
One of the absolute lowest hanging fruit, I feel like, and one of the things that so many people aren't doing is treat yourself, no matter how big or small you are, whether you raise 100 birds or 100,000, like a business. And in doing that, run the business's own bank account. So many people that come in, they do everything out of, like, they're paying their grocery bill and their electric bill and their water bill out of the same bank account that they're buying their feed and their chicks and paying their butcher and things out of. And it will make it so much easier on yourself getting your stuff ready for taxes if you're able to sit down with a bank account and know that everything in this bank account was business expenses. And then when you want money from the farm for your other things, write yourself a paycheck.
So just thinking about what I do personally, I have that farm account, but every once in a while it slips and buys something at the grocery store. I'm the example of what you shouldn't do.
But because you have that separate account, it's easy to go through and cherry pick where those things happen.
Gotcha.
Because that's not the norm. When you sit down and look through every month, it's not half of it's business, half of it's personal. You're able to go through and find a couple weeks ago, I accidentally used the wrong card at the grocery store, and it makes it easy to find.
Gotcha. To that end, do you recommend everybody use that account to pay for everything, whether it's a check or credit card, no matter the amount?
That makes it easy. I mean, depending on the size of your business, because when you start hitting certain scales, you might operate more than one account for the business, or you might run a credit card and a bank account for the business. The main thing is isolating yourself, or financially yourself, from your business without pretending to be an attorney. If you ever do incur an issue, like if you're operating as a limited liability company, that's one of the things that if there's ever an issue and they're looking at whether or not to pierce the veil of your LLC and go after your own personal assets for something, the first thing they look at is how commingled are your finances.
Keeping that bank account separate. What's another one of the low-hanging fruits that we have out there?
Let software do as many things as you can possibly let it do, so you don't have to worry about it. Small business owners, primarily farms, come in and sit down at my desk to do taxes. One of the messiest things to deal with is mileage, because I have met very few people who keep really good paper mileage records, myself included. There is software out there now. We use one called Mile IQ that for $5 a month, it uses your smartphone to track all of your drives. And then you go in there and you swipe one direction for business and another direction for personal on every drive. And it just has it all tracked and prints out a really clean, neat report for you to be able to deduct your mileage. None of us realize how much we're driving. When you get into making deliveries and things, that deduction for your mileage can be huge.
That's a smartphone app, right? So it just detects when you're driving.
I think it picks up when the GPS in your phone starts moving over a certain speed. I think is what makes it trigger. And
so the trick then is to make sure you're consistent every time you jump in that truck.
Yeah, your phone with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't always think, like, you jump in to run down to the mill or to go pick up your chicks from the post office. You get in a hurry and you don't always think to pick up your little book and write it down. So it's so much easier when you're sitting there in an evening, like once a week, to go through and spend 2 or 3 minutes and classify everything you did in the last week as business or personal when it's already there.
Give us just the overview of what happens there.
The issue of vehicle expenses. Most people think to track out what you're buying fuel for and when you get a vehicle repaired or something. But unless you're running that vehicle for just business purposes and you have another vehicle available as a personal vehicle, it gets really hard and messy to take direct expenses. But what mileage allows you to do is on a vehicle that is not that even maybe primarily a personal vehicle that you use to commute to another job or that your spouse uses to go drop the kids off at school or something, but you get in it to make deliveries once or twice a week. It lets you take expenses on that vehicle that would be really hard to split out otherwise. And a lot of times where, like in our personal scenario, we have a couple personal vehicles and then a vehicle that is actually the business's vehicle. And the mileage on the personal vehicles always comes out to a better number for us than the direct expenses.
We systematize things. We use technology where we can. Mileage IQ is one example. Do you have another?
I use paper receipts. If you're trying to put your stuff together at the end of the year, unless you're really into bookkeeping, most people end up putting their tax stuff together in like December, January, February, maybe even March.
I heard one farmer say June recently, which is where you come in, I think.
we see a lot of that too. Paper receipts, when you're looking at them 6 to 8 months later, aren't always that useful because they fade, and it's a technology thing again. And that's kind of been my kick lately, is finding ways to let technology do things for me so that I don't have to worry about it. There are so many scanner apps out there on your phone, and just create a file in your email and download one of those scanner apps so that every time you get back in the car after you've bought something, scan that receipt with your phone, send it to that file. Scan the receipt with your phone, send it to the file. And then it doesn't matter, like, throw all your paper receipts in a box. You don't have to open the box again because they're all, you have a picture of all of them that you can go through when you're trying to organize everything at tax time. And you don't have to worry about trying to figure out, well, I can see the name of where I spent the money, but I don't know how much I spent or when I did it. And it saves a lot of headache later on trying to organize that stuff.
Tractor Supply receipts tend to really fade easily, by the way.
Atwoods is the one around here where they're kind of like a Tractor Supply. And those receipts, you can always make out the Atwoods, but you can never make out anything below that.
QuickBooks always comes up as that year-round accounting package. Is that what you recommend?
I work with QuickBooks. I get really frustrated with QuickBooks. And most people who use it very much do. I primarily do all of my farm books and then bookkeeping clients. We are now running in a software called Xero. And it's a web-based software that works a lot like QuickBooks Online, if that's something that someone's familiar with. And there are several other ones out there, like FreshBooks, I've never used, but that I've seen in things online that people are using. The thing that has steered me to Xero is it kind of speaks in language that a business owner is going to be more able to understand rather than an accountant. It's more intuitive, and it cuts out a lot of the double entry type stuff that can get people in trouble on QuickBooks by accidentally taking an expense twice or counting income twice because of a keying error in the software. Xero does that in the background, so it kind of gives you some safeguards against double entering stuff.
Okay, that's Xero, right?
Yes.
I've actually just started using something called Wave Apps.
I've heard good things about that one, but I've not seen the software yet.
They charge by swiping cards. They do transaction fees. Otherwise, it's a free service.
Xero has several different fee levels depending on how many transactions and things you're running through it. We run our business on a $30 a month level, and we run all of our invoices through it. So it's automatically tracking. I sold this many pounds of chicken breast, this many pounds of whole birds, this many pounds of. I don't do a great job of keeping track of inventory that's in the freezer necessarily, but I know how much it's sold.
Hey, let's take a minute and hear from our sponsor. As a pastured poultry farmer, I've learned to seek out the best feed that I can for my flock, and that means I look for feed that uses Fertrell's Poultry NutriBalancer. A healthy flock that can live outside doesn't need an ordinary poultry nutritionist. It requires someone who understands the demands of outdoor production. Jeff Maddox, who leads the Fertrell Animal Health Team, is that poultry nutritionist. NutriBalancer is a complete vitamin and mineral supplement full of trace minerals, probiotics, and other essentials to give your flock performance and production. And you can use it for all types of poultry. That means you can have the healthiest broilers, layers, turkeys, ducks, or any other poultry that you're raising. Fertrell's Poultry NutriBalancer is also organically approved by most certifiers, which means certified organic flocks can rest at ease knowing their vitamin and mineral supplements meets the standards. To learn more about Fertrell's Poultry NutriBalancer, visit Fertrell.com or email them for a PDF catalog at info@fertrell.com. That's spelled Fertrell. You can also give them a call at 800-347-1566 to speak to a nutritionist on staff, and be sure to tell them that Mike Badger sent you. Now let's get back into our program. To be honest, I've looked at QuickBooks before. I know my wife has tried it. We just never got the hang of it.
It's not intuitive unless you have a pretty serious accounting background, and that's why I've loved Xero. And I do have several clients that are running smaller businesses that are successfully using Quicken, which is Intuit, the company that makes QuickBooks. It's their light version of the software, basically. It
always struck me. I'm like, when I see people just recommend it de facto, I'm like, really? Like, all these people know how to use that? Like, but I suspect it's probably like a lot of other things. They leave a lot of features on the floor. They
We do quite a few business clients in our office, and there is one client that I can say has phenomenal QuickBooks books. The rest of them are varying degrees of, we can probably sort this mess out. And there are several every year that it's like, you're going to have to bring us in these receipts and we're going to have to rebuild it.
Let's talk a little bit about the taxes itself. And the first thing I want to ask about is Schedule F. Obviously, I think most of us who are operating or doing farm and ag as a business here have filled out the Schedule F. But is that, in your experience and in your opinion, not necessarily your advice, but is Schedule F always necessary for a farm, or is there other ways that it could happen?
If you're doing farming activity, you pretty much have to run a Schedule F. There are a few circumstances where if you're offering a primary like service with just a little bit of farming, you can probably get away running a Schedule C, which is just a normal business schedule. But even though it's clunky for a lot of smaller, more niche farms, you're pretty much going to have to run a Schedule F.
Okay.
And you've got to kind of be liberal in how you define some of the things that we use. To like, if you're using dish soap and scald water, you can put that under the chemicals column in a Schedule F to make yourself fit in it, because it is kind of clunky.
Right.
But you're pretty much going to have to run a Schedule F.
And to that end, I'm going to bring up the question that you answered in the Pastured Poultry Talk Facebook group. You know, they basically said this is the first year we're doing these taxes. If we buy chicks for meat, do they have to be listed as bought for resale or just raised for sale? And you clarified that using the actual lingo on the Schedule F. So if you...
I referenced the actual lines. And what you're talking about there is on the Schedule F, the top line, the first one is sales of livestock for resale. And then under that, there's a sub for cost of those livestock. And then below that, line 2 is sales of livestock or crops raised. The top set is really what it's designed for are people who are trading in cattle. That don't hold them over a year. They're buying and selling in cattle. I believe some of that happens in pigs. And if you wanted a poultry parallel, it would probably be for people who may be like breeding like small flock exotics and who are trading in and out of roosters at auctions and things like that. That would be where that first line comes in, the stuff that's bought and held for resale.
Okay.
Beyond that, especially if you're running a business where you're not selling the live poultry, where you're having it processed and you're selling a food product, you're absorbing so many other expenses along the way through the transportation and butchering and storage on your farm, that you really want to move that down to the sales of livestock raised. Then you'll run all of your expenses down in the part 2 of the form.
One of the last, I guess, technical questions I have for you is the idea of a 1099. I used to write magazine articles and I would get a 1099 back at tax time that said, okay, we paid Mike, X number of dollars. So I'm familiar in that context, but I want to just ask you to clarify when you should expect a 1099 and when you should issue one as a farm.
What a 1099 is a document. It's a parallel document to a W-2 that you get from a company you work for. But the 1099 occurs when you were working as an independent contractor. The rule is if you contract someone for a service and you pay them more than $600, you issue them a 1099. And so as a farm, that means I have a landlord that I write a check for $2,500 a year to. He gets a 1099. He's providing me the service of using his land. I have a butcher that I pay more than $600 a year. He gets a 1099. I have a feed mill that I buy way more than $600 worth of feed from, but that is a product. It is not a service. They do not get a 1099. That's for you sending them out. For receiving them, say you're a poultry farm, but you hire out to a neighbor to, if you're in farm country, to run a tractor during harvest season or something, and they pay you $800, that farm is going to give you a 1099. What it's doing, it's income that you should be counting anyway, that
Right.
You should be representing anyway, whether you got it or not. And if you're issuing them, their expenses, you're definitely going to want to count because you don't want to spend money that you're not getting credit for. What that does is that lets the IRS know that transaction happened. And they know to look for that. Like if you spent the money, they know to check and make sure that person counted it as income.
The revelation for me was the processor side of it, like, giving that processor a 1099 for their services. Well,
and honestly, I am the only one in a several county area here that is running a business like this with the poultry.
Right.
Or where I am direct selling a finished meat product. There are a few people who are doing halves and wholes in cattle, and it's just a different kind of business. But where I'm actually using cuts and I'm paying a butcher, we had some arguments about it in the tax office about what to do about it. And actually went up the line through H&R Block to some of the tax researchers who were actually working with the IRS, kind of figure out how to deal with that. And you do need to be issuing your butcher a 1099. For people who are used to filling out their own tax forms, I mean, when you start running a business, you can get into complicated forms and things in a hurry where it really starts to look good to hire someone to do it. But a 1099, as far as filling out, is not a tremendously intimidating form to fill out. All you have to have is the name, address, and tax ID number of the person you're issuing it to. So that would either be a social security number or an employer identification number, and then how much you paid them. And for our purposes, most of the time that income would be shown in the box for either rent or for non-employee compensation in the case of the butcher.
Is there anything else we didn't cover that you feel we should?
The biggest thing is you'll save yourself so much headache, and it's really hard to do, not so much now, but as you get into April, May, June, and you're really busy, it's really easy to say, I'll deal with all this winter. But the more that you can do as you go along, whether that's keeping your spreadsheet or your accounting software up to date and reconciling your bank account, or keeping track of your receipts, the more that you can do as you go along, the more stress that you will save yourself in tax season next year. And so along that, if you're thinking about getting ready to start throwing together stuff for taxes this year, it's a really good time to make sure you're staying caught up on your 2018 stuff so that you don't have a whole lot of headache going into 2019 and getting ready to do those taxes.
Don't procrastinate, the bottom line there.
that is your worst enemy, because something that would take you 15, 20 minutes a week right now will end up taking you 3 or 4 days to put back together in the winter. When you're so far removed from remembering, where did I drive when I wrote those miles down?
Right.
Or what was I actually buying when I spent this money at the mill? Was it feed? Was it garden hose? Was it whatever?
Yep.
You'll save yourself so much headache. Out of our H&R Block office, we do full service bookkeeping, depending on the size of your business. And if you're at a point where you're ready to outsource that and have another set of eyes looking at it and reconciling those receipts and things for you, so that's off your plate. And when we do that, it includes, like, we keep everything up to date and reconciled for you. That includes producing your 1099s when it gets time for tax season. We do it for $150 a month, and that includes the cost of all the bookkeeping software and stuff that goes with that, and those 1099s. And it also comes with a pretty significant discount on your tax return if we do your tax return. We also offer payroll services. If anybody has any questions or is interested in that, you can get a hold of me at chad.ward@hnrblock.com.
I appreciate it, Chad. Thanks for spending a little bit of time here this morning chatting about this stuff. I know it's like the proverbial pain in the butt every year.
This is the side of the business. More people will sink themselves on the financial side of the business than on the production side. It's the annoying part, but if you don't keep it up, you can get in trouble with your states or with the IRS in a hurry, and they are people you do not want after you.
No doubt about that.
Always a pleasure to chat with you, Mike.
Hey, thanks again, Chad. I appreciate it. Hey, that's going to wrap us for this episode. Thanks once again for the opportunity to come directly into your ears and share some time together. You can find links and show notes at pasturepoultrytalk.com/66. Till next time.